The fact that our friend and ally has come to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course. Indeed, you could easily imagine a Canadian view that says, we are safe on our continent and we have things to do at home. So let's turn inward. Let's say Canada first. Here's why that would be wrong.
A clear and present course in the face of a perceived clear and present threat from the world order. Is Canada parting ways with Donald Trump's America? That was Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland laying out Canada's foreign policy priorities. And that clear and sovereign course she spoke of, it's a full-on commitment to the post-war international order. You know, the one that experts say is dying. Freeland says Canada will play an active role in the preservation and strengthening of the global order, seemingly with or without the United States. This is new territory for Canada and indeed for the world. Can the Western Alliance remain strong without the backing of America? Can Germany, France, and Canada keep NATO, the UN, and our free trade agreements alive and well without the explicit backing of the United States? I'm curious what the Sunday Scrum thinks of Freeland's agenda. Grab your morning drink of choice and settle in with freelance columnist Susan Riley. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning.
Katie O'Malley.
Water's my drink of choice.
And 2 olives. Okay. Yeah. Katie O'Malley of iPolitics. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Carol.
Okay, Katie, let me begin with you this week. Is there any doubt in your mind that Canada has sent a clear message that it's breaking with the government of the United States?
Well, I think it's not so much definitely taking a different path. I think the speech was deliberately crafted. And actually, I think it's important that you look at it in conjunction with the speech we heard later in the week from Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan, but also the speech we heard earlier from Environment Minister Catherine McKenna on environmental policy. All of those kind of laid out this three-phase, or I guess three-pronged approach to international relations, not just on the diplomatic front, but also on the defense front and on climate change and on sort of more social justice and social activist issues. So in that sense, they're definitely laying out a different vision, not necessarily one that is directly diametrically opposed to the U.S., but kind of just going Canada's own way.
Okay, John, what do you think?
Well, I'm one of those who believes that this is a simply breathtaking departure and deeply, deeply disturbing. Look, Canada and the United States are different on foreign policy issues before. Lyndon Johnson and Lester Pearson on Vietnam, Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Bush on Iraq. But this is different. This is the Foreign Minister of Canada standing in the House of Commons, the most solemn possible venue, and saying the United States has abandoned the Western Alliance, the alliance that has kept us in the broadest sense at peace and prosperous since the Second World War. You have to be in your 80s to remember any other time that we have lived in. And they're saying the United States has left this alliance. We're on our own. I don't know what happened at those NATO meetings or G7 meetings in Europe, but whatever it was, it clearly left the Trudeau government convinced that Canada has to strike its own course. And that course is with Europeans, with the Japanese, with the South Koreans, Australians, and New Zealanders to try to hold the whole thing together, to try to keep it intact until the United States come to its senses.
Okay, Susan, what do you make of it?
Until the United States gets rid of Donald Trump is what John means, I think. I thought it was a very cleverly crafted speech, and I disagree with John. I don't think she was accusing the United States of abandoning its traditional role as kind of policeman to the world. I think she explicitly made clear that the United States is one thing and Donald Trump is another. So I think Trump's, let's say, wildly erratic approach to the world is what has got everybody concerned. You'll notice that I think the day after she delivered that speech, Mr. Trump, in one of his rare press conferences, in fact, said the U.S. is totally committed to Article 5 in NATO, which sort of says that, you know, if one of the members gets in trouble, we're all there for them. There was some concern after the NATO meeting that the United States hadn't emphasized that, hadn't even mentioned that. So it was either an oversight on Trump's part, because he really is manifestly unprepared for the job that he has, or they've changed course. So in a sense, they answered some of the worries that Freeland she outlined.
Well, okay, let's pick it up from there. Can Canada, align itself with the other partners, and will that alliance survive without the security umbrella of the United States? John?
It depends on whether there is a truly fundamental challenge. Because if there is a serious challenge, the answer is clearly no. Canada cannot defend its airspace without the United States. Europe cannot defend its eastern borders with Russia if it is truly challenged by Russia without the United States. This whole alliance was crafted by the United States in the 1940s to create a stable international order in the face of threats. In those days, it was the Soviet Union. Today, it's more China and Russia, and of course, non-state actors. So we can only hope, pray, really, that we have 3.5 years of peace, and that at some point Donald Trump leaves the stage and the traditional alliance resumes, although with what damage? Nothing like this can happen that doesn't leave some kind of residual after effect. By the way, one other interesting thing about this, the Trudeau government has been very careful in talking about the Trump regime because of NAFTA, because of the North American Free Trade Agreement negotiations that begin in August. And the feeling was we have to keep the Americans on side, and we have to keep this highly temperamental president from tweet storming against Canada. Clearly, whatever happened at the NATO meetings and the G7 meetings left Justin Trudeau believing there's no point anymore, that the man cannot be dealt with, that he cannot be assuaged or appeased, and that Canada is going to have to stand up for itself. That itself is a deeply worrying situation.
Katie?
I'm not sure why John would say that it's necessarily worrying. I suspect for most Canadians who sort of tuned into the speech or to some of the coverage thereof were probably quite relieved and pleased to hear this message coming out of the government, because I don't really get the sense that there is a huge appetite amongst the Canadian public, much as in the case in most countries around the world, for a government sort of rejigging its entire foreign policy vision so as not to offend the man who's in the presidency for the next 3.5 years. So, I mean, in that sense, I think that this was probably, some might even say overdue. There were, there've been some months where there was real sort of questions and concerns over whether Canada was going to stand up for itself, both on the trade front, but also for these sort of principles and these international, this international message that Canada has sort of constantly been giving in praise of sort of rule-based systems, in praise of international order, that seem to be almost muted by this desire to not make waves with the American administration. And I think that the fact that, kind of in a 1, 2, 3 act show that we saw in Parliament for the last week, they kind of made it clear that no, Canada has been watching, taking notes, making plans, and this is kind of our plan, and we're not just going to rewrite it because it may not align with what the Americans are going to do over the sort of short-term future.
John, do you want to respond to that?
Well, look, I feel as happy as anyone else that Canada is standing up for itself, and that Europe is standing up for itself. But the fact remains, as I said earlier, we cannot expect that the Western Alliance can hold together for very long without the United States, because it is the linchpin of that alliance. And secondly, it's all well and good to declare Canadian values and principles and interests. But if we go into the North American free trade negotiations and the Americans come loaded for bear, ready to impose some kind of tax on the border, punitive sanctions on really punitive sanctions on softwood, demands that we dismantle the supply management system, and other things that could do great damage to the Canadian economy, well, principles sound fine, but it's jobs that matter.
I know, but these are big ifs, John, and I agree with you that these ifs keep people here in Ottawa up at night worrying. But there are other forces at play in the United States, and we see it every day. We had Steve Mnuchin, the American Treasury Secretary, up here this week, and he was essentially smoothing the waters and saying, look, don't worry, dairy, lumber, yes, we have problems, but they're not huge. They're not going to undermine the entire relationship. We've had similar messages from Jim Mattis, the Defense Secretary, and other American senior officials. Now, you could say, well, maybe they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. I think that simply kind of reflects the fact that Donald Trump is almost a force unto himself. Meanwhile, there's the USA, which continues in its usual traditional patterns. And again, Freeland made mention in that speech about the importance of NORAD and Canada's continuing participation in NORAD. I mean, in fact, the general dislike and mistrust of Trump in Canada and elsewhere in the world let her get away with, I would say, a rather hawkish speech. It was, yes, somewhat Pearsonian, although there was, I think, no mention whatsoever of peacekeeping, but it was more like John Manley liberalism, which was a more sort of muscular, that was the word that Ms. Freeland used, approach to the world. I'm not sure if in another circumstance with a different president that would sit well with Canadians, but so far, so good. I don't think for the Liberals, that is to say. I haven't heard very many substantive criticisms from the opposition benches.
Okay, one more thing I want to bring up with you, and John, you mentioned this. You better hope there might not be a threat, but there are some substantial threats that we all share. Climate change, for example, non-state actors like ISIS, and climate change as well as Russia. You know,
yeah,
so those threats exist already.
Yeah, I don't think we should be Pollyannish about this. Certainly, there are American states that are committed to maintaining the principles of the Paris Climate Change Accord. Great on them for doing that. Yes, you have competent, for the most part, cabinet secretaries who are trying to keep the ship steady in spite of what Donald Trump might tweet at 3 a.m. But the fact is, the President of the United States is the President of the United States. His discretionary powers, especially in foreign policy, are enormous and cannot be reined in. And if he decides to go in a particular direction, for example, to permit Russia to become aggressive on the eastern border in the Baltic states, where Canada now has a battle group in place in Latvia, the potential for disaster is huge. North Korea, the potential for disaster is huge. At any given time, there are big challenges facing the West. But up until now, we have at least had competent presidents, committed presidents, helping to manage that alliance. We don't have that now, and we should not, I believe, I don't want to scaremonger, but it would be irresponsible for us to downplay the danger that we're in.